Hello, this is Allie with the Perception Trainers, author of The Perception Diet, and today we're going to talk about awakening. And so I actually was planning to make this video and already had the write-up all done and everything like that, and then I got asked by someone to make this video, so I thought, well, that's just great. We're also in alignment with each other. So in this video, I am essentially going to give you my perspective on what awakening is and how we get there and what it really looks like to be awake, and can everybody awaken, and is everybody going to awaken, and how do we awaken? So again, I'm going to preface this video by saying much of this is my own opinion, my own observation. Feel free to completely disagree with me. I'm sure that there will be lots of people that disagree with me. And this is simply just what I've come to in my life, where I have created more order, more complexity, more structure, and more freedom, more capacity to understand how reality works and all of these things. So this is my definition of waking up, and maybe I'll change my mind in 10 years. Maybe it's totally wrong. I don't know. But so far, from what I've observed, this is kind of these, and also in studying people who claim to be awake and seeing kind of the commonalities and maybe the things that are missing, and just really doing a big study of this pretty much my entire life. This is what I've come to, all right? So like I say, you don't need to take this as law. You don't need to take this as like, this is the ultimate answer. Explore this for yourself. Think about this for yourself. I would expect nothing less of you than to think about this on your own and to disagree with me, or to embellish on what I've said, or any of those things. So that's beautiful. All right. So my definition of waking up is a very simple one. It's really nothing all that special other than coming into alignment with reality. Essentially, realizing all the places where you have made an assumption about the reality that isn't true, and therefore is inhibiting your capacity to be an effective creator. All right? So, because again, in my observation, we can see that there are patterns in human nature, and there are patterns in nature itself that can lead us to kind of make some of these assumptions about life and about ourselves. So for instance, the reason that I believe awakening is all about understanding reality, understanding yourself, and then expressing that is because the way that reality is and is unfolding is very similar to the way that we work when we are trying to understand something, okay? So where I get my idea that the kind of like purpose of life is for consciousness, all that consciousness is, which is just everything that exists. It's all the isness. Consciousness, all of everything that exists, to fully understand itself. The reason that I believe that that is what is going on here is because what do humans do? What do we do when we want to understand how something works? We break it all down into its separate parts and figure out how all those individual parts work, and then how they work together, and then we figure out that's how this thing works. So if we want to know how a radio works, we take it all apart, we figure out what each little individual piece is doing, we figure out what all those individual pieces do inside the whole, how it all serves the whole thing working, and then we say, okay, now I understand how the radio works. And if we look at reality, we can see that that's exactly what's happened. Consciousness has taken itself apart. It's literally divided itself into like the smallest little bits. And the biggest bit, you can look at it in any context, right? From the tiniest tiny little particle to whatever smaller than a particle to the multiverse itself. It's and everything in between. Every aspect has been unpacked so that we can understand. Yes? And then we have these individual perspectives and individual lines of consciousness that show us that we are like a part in the radio. Like one of us is this wire, and one of us is this node, and one of us is this dial. And as each individual realizes who they are, what they do, what their role in this whole thing is, there is a capacity to understand how the whole thing works in the context of yourself. Yeah, that we cannot understand anything outside the context of how it relates to us and how we relate to it. That there is no separation between us and our environment. And the more we kind of try to separate ourselves from our environment, we can see that we're falling into chaos by doing that. So the more we learn about ourselves, and this is something that I've absolutely seen be a pattern, that the more people out there learn about themselves, the more they tend to understand about the nature of reality itself. And then the second thing that I would say is in my observation, I have seen that suffering comes from a misunderstanding of reality, having a false belief about yourself or a false belief about the reality. And the reason why that causes suffering is because at our core, we are always creating. We are always creating something. We are always, always, always creating. We are having an effect on our reality. Quantum physics has proved this. It's shown that every time a particle is observed or being measured, the observer has an impact on what the particle does. So the particle can't turn into an elephant. The particle is still limited in what it can do in its path. It can go this way, it can go that way, it can go both ways. We've seen that it's done some spooky things, but there's still some structure to how the particle can move. Like I say, it's not going to turn into an elephant because you're observing it. It's not going to turn into a dog because you're observing it. It's got a path that it can go, a couple of paths that it can go on. So there's structure, and then there's also elasticity within that structure. There's a few paths that it can take, not infinite paths, just a few paths. The observer has an effect. So we are affecting the structure of reality with our intention. We're constantly creating. There's no such thing as just observing. By just being an observer, you're causing an effect, and that's a creation. So if you are creating with a fundamental misunderstanding of how the structure works, your creation is not going to match what your expectation of your creation is going to be. And that's what causes us pain. We have these emotional, mental traumas from having a misunderstanding about our power, about what we can do here, about how the reality works, about what's true about us, about what's true about reality. And the reason that hurts is because we then go out assuming we're going to create this outcome, and we don't get that outcome because we don't understand the structure, right? So when we have a false belief about our worthiness, we're going to go out and do a whole bunch of things to try and get love, when that doesn't align with the idea, the truth that love is completely available at all times, and that it truly is just us loving ourselves and allowing for that love, which is the one and only energy, to flow through you that is required. You don't have to do all this other crazy stuff, right? We have set the boundaries and the limits of our own perception on the reality, and then, so like I say, we go out, do all these things that we think are going to get us love. We don't get the result because that's not how it works. We suffer because we don't get what we want. We're not creating effectively. And then at the same time, when we have false beliefs about ourselves and about the reality, what that tends to lead to, again, in my observation, is that we reject ourselves, we reject our emotions, we reject our thoughts, we don't express as we are. And then because we are all connected, because there's this whole big loop of infinite conductivity and connectivity, that when one is not serving their role, when one is not playing their role, we all suffer. So there is this sense of like, I'm not living my purpose. I'm not expressing who and what I am clearly and in like with the biggest capacity that I can to my best knowledge of who I am right now. And that hurts, right? Because again, I have observed that people continue to change and grow and learn their whole lives. And that the real, true, happy people are not the ones that have everything handed to them. They're not the ones that have every circumstance they want. They're not the ones that have the most money or the most women or the most whatever it is that we think is going to make us happy. The happiest people tend to be the ones that have this attitude of, I'm learning from everything. I'm benefiting from everything. I'm taking in all this information and I'm changing because of it. I'm becoming more myself. Every single time I learn something, I apply the information, I express in a new way, I find a new freedom, I find where my power is, where I didn't know where it was before, I figure out something else about the universe, and therefore, when I go out to create something, when I have a goal, I know how to get there. It's not a big mystery to me anymore. And so this is why I say this is what awakening is. It's waking up to reality. And that's why you have heard this said a million times, that a lot of the time when people wake up, they laugh because it's just, oh, it's all right fucking here. And that's what we got to understand. That waking up is truly just removing and filtering through all of the filters you have put on reality that don't align with how reality actually functions. And we have really gotten to this place now where we are so lost and confused that people genuinely believe the reality doesn't exist. That people genuinely believe that the reality has no structure. And that's because we're just not capable right now in our consciousness generally of holding paradox. So if you haven't watched my paradox video, I would suggest that you do that, right? Because nature and reality is paradox. It holds everything. It's masculine and feminine. It's north and it's south. It's structured, so the particle can go this way, this way, this way, this way. It can't turn into an elephant. It can't turn into a dog. It can't do anything. It has a structure, but it also has elasticity. It has a few options, and the observer affects what option happens, or it does it by itself without an observer. So this is what we need to understand. Yes, the nature of reality is structured in that there is rules, there are laws, it does have a structure, and it's elastic, meaning we can create within it. Because again, if there was no structure, we could not create. If there was no stuff to create with, we couldn't create anything. But if it was all set in stone, if there was no elasticity, we also couldn't create. And we know that we are creators. That's what we're doing. We're mirroring consciousness itself. Creator, creation, same thing. Yeah? So as we're awakening, that's what we're doing. And so we do see that there are kind of these two paths that have been taught throughout history, right? The path of going in, the path of meditation, the path of Zen, the path of lose yourself, right? There's that whole path. And then there's the path of action, the path of yoga, the path of doing stuff, the path of being a householder and waking up in that and finding reality. And both of these are two different ways of trying to help us find reality without our filters on it, okay? And like I said in a lot of my past videos, I think we've made a little bit of a weird misstep when we've tried to get rid of the self as though I am my impediment to understanding reality. So we do the Zen Buddhism thing to lose your ego. We do the path of action to be completely of service to others and forget about ourselves. And I think that that's kind of where we get a little bit lost, is that, again, if you're not understanding yourself, the fractal of all that is that you represent, you're not gonna understand all of it because you're a part of it. Without you, you can't understand it. Yes? Without the one part, the whole thing doesn't work. Yeah? You can't remove yourself from the picture and try to understand the picture because you're part of the picture and the picture is part of you. It's all one. So these two paths of introspection and action, what I would like to suggest is that if we combine the two techniques with the understanding that learning to love and accept and know who you are, so these three prongs, action and service to others, absolutely go out in the world, because this is the thing. You're never going to understand reality if you're not interacting with it. If you're trying to haul yourself up in your house, just meditate for 80 hours a day, not interact with people, you're never going to understand. It's all those conflicts, all that trauma, all those triggers that you face in your reality that are showing you reality, right? You're never going to know where your fake, false expectations of reality are if you're not facing the pain and suffering of meeting with your expectation not being met with reality. You have to do the action, okay? But if we're all action, no contemplation, we will never understand that it's our mindset that's causing us all of our sufferings. If we're all action, we're just going to continue to try and take action and action and action without taking in more information, without contemplating, and we're just going to do the same actions over and over again, which is going to keep us suffering. So if we're just all action, all self-sacrifice, We burn ourselves out just doing the same action over and over again. That's where contemplation comes in. The contemplation part is, okay, I did my action, now what happened? What was the result? Did it go how I thought it would? If it didn't, reality isn't wrong. I'm wrong. That's the key. Reality isn't wrong. If it's happening, I need to understand it. If I'm judging it as wrong, I'm blocking myself from understanding it. So again, we can look at things like abuse, and we can look at things like traumas and things that we see are like, well, that's clearly wrong. That's clearly bad. We don't want that to happen. Okay. And then for someone to say, but accept it. We need to accept it. Again, we need to understand. We are creators. We are creating the conditions for abuse. We have created the conditions for all of these things we don't like. And the judgment of all of these things has been going on for a long time, and it hasn't gotten rid of them. So we can see that clearly that's not the answer. We need to understand why the conditions exist for these acts of violence, for abuse, for trauma. We need to understand them, and then we need to say, okay, now as a creator, how can I start to create a world where those conditions no longer exist? Yeah? You start to see, oh, really it boils down to everyone that's abused, everyone that is abusive was abused, and then they weren't rehabbed properly. And we can do something about that. That's not a hard thing to do. We don't need to punish people. People are abusive because they have been punished. And again, I know that there's a big out there right now, just that there are just people out there who are completely privileged and have never been through anything, and they're just abusive and horrible. And again, we got to what are the conditions there? There are conditions. We have to understand, and sitting in judgment is never going to get us anywhere, because we've sat in judgment for a long time, and it doesn't work. It doesn't get rid of it. So as much as we think we're helping the world by judging things as wrong, we're not. And that's part of waking up, is realizing, okay, if I don't like this thing, it's my responsibility to figure out why it's happening. It's my responsibility to do what I can do to create something new, because we're never going to get rid of an old thing. We're going to create a new system. We gotta understand that about reality. Reality is constantly functioning. There's no vacuum. We don't get rid of things. Reality abhors a vacuum. Yeah? So if you are seeing something you don't like, you need to understand every aspect of it, and you need to create a new system where that thing doesn't have to exist anymore. You replace it, right? You don't just stop eating bad food. You replace it with good food. Anyways. So, but again, if we're all contemplation, no action, we're never going to realize, we can really easily convince ourselves that we've seen reality and we get it, and then we go out and get triggered and we're like, oh, it's just the reality. Like, I'm so enlightened when I'm in my meditation, but then my husband triggers me enough, he could just be different. No, that's you, right? If you can't be at peace, if you don't know where your power is, so again, this is not, awakening does not mean I just accept everything blindly and passively now. Yes? Awakening is some things are the way they are, and I need to learn to work within that. Some things I can change, and I'm the one that's contributing to this chaos, right? So again, my definition of waking up is really growing up, taking responsibility for the messes you have made with your misunderstandings of reality, and learning to create more order, structure, and complexity in the world. Learning to create from the center of understanding your role in the whole, understanding that you are completely a part of it, that you being an ego does not separate you from the whole, but it connects you to the whole, and that you have a responsibility to be yourself, to bring to the world what you have to bring to the world, and that's what that is. So I believe, again, it's these three-prong. Action so you can see what's going on, contemplation so you can actually integrate it, and figuring out who you are and what you're here to do. And all those three things, that's what awakening is. That's how you awaken. And no, it's not a guarantee. Everyone has free will. Just like that particle can go on several different paths, we get to take our suffering and say, this makes me a victim, which is what most people are doing. Or we can take our suffering and say, this is going to wake me up. What am I not seeing? I'm going to be humble to say, I am suffering because I see the reality wrong. I am suffering because I see myself wrong, and therefore I'm stunted in my creativity. That's why this hurts. And I can understand reality because it's right there. I just have to stop judging it. I have to stop projecting onto it. And I have to stop saying it's wrong. And I have to say it's right. So what can I learn? and you will create more order, complexity, and structure. Your life will be amazing. Okay.